Hey everyone, Dave back with you from Summit Racing at Virtual Super Summit in the Midway, and we're catching up today with Ridetech, and we have Darron from Ridetech with us. Darron, how you doing today?
I'm great. Hope you guys are doing well.
Yeah, thanks for joining us and being a part of this. I want to talk a little bit about choosing between some of your suspension system options in a little bit, but I kind of first wanted to get into Ridetech itself, the company, where it's been, how it's evolved over the years. So just kind of give us a 1,000-foot overview of Ridetech.
Yeah, Ridetech started out in 1996. A guy named Brett Vocal actually started the company, and primarily doing air suspension. He was an enthusiast, and a lot of that passion of the industry is really what's driven Ridetech to continue to evolve over the years. From 96 to about 2010, primarily air suspension. You guys might remember the name Air Ride Technologies. We were one of the forefront in the air suspension game during that time period. And then about 2010, frankly, when the economy slowed down a little bit, that gave us a little bit of a breathing room and time to redesign some more parts. And at that point, we teamed up with Fox Racing to develop a complete coil-over line and reinvent our shock line in general. And since about 2010, we've been using Fox shocks ever since. And then a new development last April of 2019, Ridetech and Fox Racing joined forces officially. So we are now part of the Fox family team of companies. So it's been a very exciting journey over the years. So
Yeah, so you talk a little bit about Fox Racing. Fox shocks are monotube in design, right? So you guys, that's exclusively what you guys offer, correct?
Yeah, over the years we've used tons of different shock manufacturers and shock designs, and monotube shocks, in my opinion, are definitely the best shock design out there. And Fox is one of the few companies that can provide such a high quality shock at a fairly reasonable price. I mean, in general, you're going to pay a little bit more than you would for a twin tube shock, but the bang for the buck is definitely there. It's a much better value.
And of course, you mentioned the Air Ride heritage and the air suspension systems, and then you evolved. Now you've got coilovers, you've got the StreetGrip. That's really some of the things I wanted to focus on here, because in talking to you earlier, you're saying that's a lot where the questions center around when you go to shows like Super Summit from the customers. Which system would be right for what I'm trying to do with my particular vehicle? So for me, I was going to focus on first gen F body as an example, and if you could tell me some of the options we'd have available for that vehicle and where their strengths and weaknesses are, depending on what I want to do with that vehicle.
Yeah, the first generation Camaro is definitely our most popular platform. We do a ton of stuff for the early Chevelles, second gen Camaro, Mustang, C10 trucks, and a wide plethora of vehicles, frankly, from 1932 all the way to C7 Corvette. So a wide range of options out there. But for the primary, if we're looking at the muscle car market and the classic truck market, we have three basic suspension designs that we work with. The coilover and air suspension systems are very similar in design. Most of those are going to include tubular upper and lower control arms to provide suspension geometry improvements. Most of them will include tall spindles. A lot of those early Camaros, specifically in Chevelles, had very poor suspension geometry because the spindles were a lot shorter than what they needed to be, and they just didn't have very much negative camber gain. So by implementing a tall spindle in a lot of these applications, we can get very modern suspension geometry out of these old cars. Because that's kind of everyone's basic plan at the end of the day is to take this old car that maybe doesn't drive up to par compared to today's standards, and try to get modern drivability out of it. So, and with the coilover systems and the air suspension, on that particular example, the first generation Camaro, again, it'll have tubular upper and lower control arms. It'll have a front sway bar that's going to be much beefier and a lot less body roll. And then on that car, we're going to eliminate the rear leaf springs, and we're going to put a 4-link back there. That's the best way to do the air suspension and coilover systems on it, is to just get rid of that 4-link, or get rid of the leaf springs and go to a 4-link. The 4-link system's going to offer much better anti-squat percentage, so it's going to hook up a lot better. Going to eliminate any chance of wheel hop and provide a much better ride quality overall, because we're taking all those different jobs that the leaf spring was trying to do, and now we got individual components that'll do that job even better. So
tubular control arms, just I know you have one in the shop with you, but what's the big advantage there? Is it just the suspension geometry itself, or what's the advantage?
Yeah, great question, Dave. Yeah, I got one here. This is a control arm we build in-house here in Indiana. Again, it's all tubular, and we're not just trying to make a pretty control arm out of this thing. We're actually trying to improve the suspension geometry at the same time. And one of the main things that we're going to do in this control arm design is we're actually going to shift that ball joint further back on the vehicle. These old cars, you couldn't get much caster when you aligned it, and caster is basically leaning the spindle back. And by moving that ball joint angle, by moving the ball joint location, we can get a whole lot more. Instead of the factory spec of 1 degree caster, maybe, we can now get 5, 6, 7 degrees positive caster, and that greatly improves the high-speed stability and steering wheel returnability. Going down the interstate, you can just let go of the wheel and the car goes straight. These old cars wouldn't do that. The other thing we've done is we've actually corrected the ball joint angle. I was talking earlier about the use of the tall spindles. And with the tall spindle, we generally got to correct the ball joint angle for use with that to just so we don't bind out the ball joints, because when ball joints bind, bad things happen. We also changed the length of the arm to just get back into the adjustment range on the camber as well. And you'll even notice these arms, you can get an angle here, they'll actually come with a caster slug. So if you're going to get very extreme into autocross road course racing and you want maybe 7 or 8 degrees caster, we can just change these slugs out and get even more caster out of it. And with those tall control arms, what's really going on there, the factory arm is actually downhill like this at right height. And then as the suspension compresses, you're actually pushing the top of the spindle out. And what that creates is positive camber gain. It's tilting the wheel out, which is the opposite of what we want. We want negative camber gain. So with the tall spindle, the arm is actually tilted uphill like this at ride height starting out with. So as the suspension compresses, it's now pulling the top of the spindle in, creating that negative camber gain. Trying to keep that tire flat to the pavement. You may have a 9 or 10 inch wide tire on the car, but if you can't keep that rubber perpendicular to the pavement, it's not going to do any good.
Okay. So talk a little bit about how tire designs have changed the game a little bit for what you guys do in suspension geometry. I know a lot plays into that.
Yep, that's often a question. People are like, well, if the suspension geometry was so bad, why did GM design it that way, right? But the reality is the tire technology back then, it was a 6 or 7 inch wide tire with tall sidewall, bias ply. A, you couldn't get that much traction. B, the manufacturers really wanted that car to push around the corner. A car that pushes, when you step on the brakes, you load the front tires, car goes around the corner. They didn't want a neutral car. They wanted a car that was more civilian to drive. But there's tons with today's tire technology. We can obviously push them a lot more, and there's tons more performance out of the car than what they come with factory. So.
Okay, so on this coilover system, and you said the air system's similar. You mentioned a little bit of the adjustability on the control arm, and then plus eliminating the wheel hop. So, is this something that you'd recommend for both, street performance, maybe autocross, and drag racing? Does it work for both?
Absolutely. We have a lot of customers using our 4-link system for drag racing. For starters, definitely, I prefer the 4-link system over leaf springs any day, even for a street car. Anything with decent horsepower, you're going to eliminate, it's going to hook up better. A lot of these, they call it a street car, right?
Right.
It's got a 600 horse twin turbo small block in it, though, right? So it's still a lot of horsepower in these cars today, and getting that power to the ground is essential. And definitely, if you're planning on doing any autocross or road course racing with it, the 4-link system is going to do much, much better.
People are definitely pushing the power numbers beyond where they used to be on an average basis. The average amount of horsepower that people are putting to street-driven vehicles is way higher. So, yeah, I'd imagine I definitely had to change the game there. So, what about on the StreetGrip side of things? What would you recommend that particular system for?
Okay, good story there. We were building a '69 Z28 all original car about 5 years ago, and it was sentimental value to the owner of the company. And putting a tubular arms and a 4-link system on the back of that car just isn't right for that car. It's not that style of build. It's not a pro touring car. It's the kind of car that needed to have an original restoration to it. But the problem is that kind of car isn't that fun to drive usually. So the design criteria with the StreetGrip system was A, keep the car mostly stock looking. When you open the hood, it looks factory. It still has leaf springs in the back. And B, we were trying to keep the price down. Most of these coilover systems are in the $4,000 to $5,000 range for a complete system, with the control arms and 4 links and sway bars and everything. Whereas a StreetGrip package, we can do that for $2,000 to $2,500, depending on the car. And it's a very simple installation that you can do in a quicker amount of time and keep that original look on the car that you're after. So,
okay. So what's all involved then? You mentioned simple installation. I think some people, could be potentially scared off with a complete system at once like that. So what goes into the installation?
So the StreetGrip kit ships in one box, and using the same example of a first generation Camaro. On the front of the vehicle, we're going to start out with a beefy sway bar. A lot of these cars didn't have sway bars at all, or they're a very small 7/8 inch sway bar, so they didn't do a lot. So big sway bar. Sway bars are great because you can eliminate a lot of body roll without hurting the ride quality. The next step was a set of good monotube shocks. Again, we used all Fox racing shocks. Here's an example of the shock that'll come with the StreetGrip kit. It's all aluminum, monotube design, and they're rebound adjustable. All Ridetech shocks at this point are rebound adjustable. One of the other tricks is a dual rate spring. That was one of the things to get the best premium ride quality and still get good performance out of it. Dual rate spring technology is somewhat new to our world in this industry. But on that particular car, for example, we're going to start out with about a 480-pound spring rate. And then after the suspension compresses about 3/4 of an inch, it's going to bump that to a 700-pound. Now, don't get that confused with the progressive rate spring that just gets stiffer and stiffer and stiffer and keeps building. The dual rate spring keeps that nice soft plush spring rate until you need the extra support on hard braking, hard cornering, extra load, things like that. So the dual rate spring goes a long way into providing a really excellent ride quality on that StreetGrip system.
Okay. Yeah, I would imagine that's another sort of advantage of picking one of these packages from you guys as opposed to maybe piecemealing. You guys sort of pick the components for it. How do you go about determining a spring rate for something for a particular application?
So we have engineers, obviously, and there's a lot of engineering software that does a lot of this stuff for you. So a few of the things we got to look at is obviously the vehicle weight. We need to look at the motion ratio on the control arms, the leverage ratio, and what that looks like. And then we have a given wheel rate that we're looking for that we like that gives the best ride quality. And so they can do a lot of this work on the computer. But at the end of the day, it's all about getting it on the car, having a car running, driving that we can test with. We actually have our own test facility here. We have our own little test track that we call it, that we can get out on and play on without having to get on the streets and really beat on these cars hard on a daily basis. And a lot of times we're going back to square one. Sometimes the computer, it'll get you close, but it may not get that last inch of performance and ride quality that we're looking for on any given product. So,
okay, yeah. So I'd imagine that's an advantage. Like I said, these parts are all designed to work with one another. You guys have tested them, so that work's already done. The customer doesn't really have to worry about any of those things I just mentioned. But it's still, I think, a good topic is always trying to figure out spring rates and how that works.
Ridetech is composed of most of our employees are enthusiasts. Almost all of our engineering, sales team, owners, all own hot rods of some sort, and we all understand what it's like to build a hot rod and be behind the seat of a car that maybe isn't doing what you want it to do. So I think we're our biggest critics most of the time. and being able to drive these cars around and beat on them. And we're going to work all the bugs out before a customer gets a hold. If I didn't complain about it, most people won't eat.
Well, we touched a little earlier on the air suspension side of things, and I did want to bring that up because I think some people are maybe slightly intimidated or have a misconception about what the air suspension system kit is compared to your other kits. So it's really not that much different, is it?
No, when you look at the hard parts, the things that make the air suspension so great are the sway bars, the shock technology, the Darron bushings and the tubular control arms, all the geometry benefits of the arms, the 4-link system. And if you compare our coilover system to the air suspension system side by side, you're going to see that all those parts are the same. The only difference is literally instead of having that Fox monotube shock with a coil spring wrapped around it, we take the coil spring off, and then same shock, we just have an air spring wrapped around it. And they create very similar spring rates. We can get excellent, we have a lot of customers that are a little hesitant on doing air suspension because they want a performance car. But we actually had a 69 Camaro that we road raced regularly with full air suspension system on it. We got a lot of a few Pro Mod cars running around with air suspension on it. They can perform quite well. It is a little easier to tune a coilover system if you're going to ultimate performance, because we can get a little more radical with the spring rates, and changing the spring rate and the vehicle height individually is a little bit easier. But you can get excellent performance out of an air suspension system.
Okay. And since it's not that much different, then the installation is not that much different. I think the only difference really is the air pod, right? I mean, that's
the compressor system. The compressor system itself is obviously a little bit more of an expense because you're going to have that on top of all the suspension parts. So that'd be the one downside, excuse me, to an air suspension system, is the compressor kit. We've made the installation of that compressor kit much easier with the air pod. The air pod has the compressor, the tank, the valves, all that stuff, the computer system, all that mounted to a board already. We've already fired that dude up in the shop here, tested it for air leaks, tested it for electronics. So it's literally just taking this pod and mounting it in your trunk. Generally, on most cars at least, we've mounted below the package tray there. Power ground, key hot, plug in your phone. Most of it's smartphone capable at this point. Do the calibrating and go to town. But the question you really got to ask yourself is an air suspension needed to accomplish your goals? And that, when a customer comes in the booth, there's a lot of times where we got to separate what they want to do with the car into what products is appropriate to accomplish their goals.
Sure.
And if we can get awesome performance and awesome ride quality out of both coilovers and air suspension systems, that leaves, a lot of times that's the main decision to make. Which one do I go with? And right. What I always tell customers is, air suspension is really for the customer that wants to get that extra low show stance. If you're trying to get that thing as low as possible, but you still want to drive it down the road and you still want to load stuff in the trunk and not bottom out all the time, air suspension is definitely the best tool for that. So,
okay. So that being said, with all these different suspension systems we talked about, what are some of the applications available for each of these? Or are all of them available across the board, or is it
pretty much across the board? Starting with 55, 57 Chevys, we have all three air suspension, coilover, and StreetGrip available. 58 to 64 Impala, 65 to 70 Impala, and then you get into the GMA bodies. 64 to 72 Chevelle, Skylark, all those we got it for. 63 all the way to 2007 Chevy trucks. I mean, Chevy truck from 63 on up, we got air suspension, coilover, and StreetGrip available for it. We just recently started getting into the newer truck stuff. Just finished the kit for 04 to 08 F-150, 07 to 13 Silverado, Camaros, G-bodies, Ford, Chevy, Dodge, across the board pretty much. So,
okay. So kind of bringing it full circle back to that 69 Camaro I mentioned at the beginning. I don't care about the lower stance necessarily that an air suspension could provide. So now I'm between the coil-over and the StreetGrip. Which direction should I go and why?
It's a very good question. One of the biggest determining factors there is budget.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking upwards of $5,000 for the coilover system, whereas the StreetGrip kit, and I don't know if we got through the StreetGrip kit completely. The StreetGrip kit is about $2,500. It includes front sway bar, front and rear shocks, dual rate springs for the front. It includes a composite leaf spring for the back, which is a very those composite leaves drop about 60, 70 pounds of unsprung weight out of the car and ride really good for a leaf spring. So a lot of it's budget. And to me, it depends on, are you one more about original restoration, or do you like that pro touring kind of look? And horsepower would be my next question. How much horsepower do you got in the car? Because if you're trying to put 600 horsepower and you want to go out and do some burnouts and get kind of crazy with it, I'm leaning towards the 4-link system and a complete coilover setup.
Fair enough. That's good to know. I know that's the systems, like you say, they fit across a bunch of applications. Our 69 Camaro is applicable when speaking about any of those older muscle cars.
It's all very similar.
Yep.
All very similar solutions there.
Well, Darron, I appreciate it. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for your time. We appreciate it, and hope to see everyone at Super Summit 2021.